In general, the FLSA applies to full-time and part-time workers in private sector and in federal, state, and local governments. So it applies to either one, employees, this is the individuals, engaged in interstate commerce, or to individuals who are employed by an enterprise engaged in commerce or in the production of goods for commerce. Again, unless there's an exemption for coverage. There's a lot of terminology there, and we'll get through that. There's also a geographic application, too. I know a lot of employers out there do some international work and have employees abroad. So employees whose services are performed in any state of the United States, the District of Columbia, and a number of U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and Guam, FLSA will apply to all of those individuals. The FLSA does not apply to employees who are working in foreign countries, even if they are U.S. citizens. So first, let's talk about enterprise coverage. Under enterprise coverage, all employees of the enterprise are going to be covered by FLSA and subject to its minimum wage, overtime, record-keeping, and child labor requirements. So an enterprise, the phrase here under the FLSA for coverage is an enterprise engaged in commerce or in the production of goods for commerce. Again, all employees are going to be covered, even those not covered as individual employees engaged in interstate commerce, which is what we will cover in the next slide. The short of it is, if your business fits in this category, your employees are subject to FLSA requirements. Per amendment to the FLSA from 1989, the phrase enterprise engaged in commerce or in the production of goods for commerce means essentially one of three things. One, that it has employees, plural, engaged in commerce or in the production of goods for commerce, or that has employees handling, selling, working on goods or materials that have been moved in or produced for commerce by any person, and is an enterprise whose annual gross volume of sales made or business done is not less than $500,000. Two, generally are hospitals and schools. So an enterprise that will qualify under here would be an employer who's engaged in the operation of a hospital, an institution primarily for the care of sick, the aged, or mentally ill, a school for mentally or physically handicapped or gifted children, a preschool, elementary, or secondary school, an institution of higher education, and that's regardless of whether it's public or private. Three, the other means by which it could be an enterprise that is covered is if the employer is an activity of a public agency. You should note, too, that where employers, where their only regular employees are the owner, his or herself, the owner's parent, spouse, child, or other member of the owner's immediate family, they are definitionally not an enterprise engaged in commerce. So you have a familial exception essentially there. Individual coverage. So even if the employer is not an enterprise that qualifies, an individual can be covered in any enterprise, provided they meet a number of these requirements. So an individual is covered if the individual is engaged in commerce or in the production of goods for commerce. Commerce in this instance means trade, transportation, transmission, or communication among the several states, or between any state and any place outside of the state. State, besides the 50 states, means the District of Columbia, and as we talked before, any territory or possession of the United States. Now, the individual to be covered does not need to engage solely or even primarily in interstate commerce or the production of goods for commerce. They are covered if the activity is regular and recurring. So what does it mean to be engaged in commerce? This is determined by the activities of the employee, not the business of the employer. It includes those who use interstate instrumentalities of commerce as regular and recurrent part of their duties. For example, employees of telephone companies, broadcasting and transportation companies, businesses such as employees of businesses such as banking, insurance, and newspaper publishing. Those are all going to be covered as individuals under the FLSA. Engaged in commerce, aside from those who use the interstate instrumentalities regularly on a recurrent basis, could also refer to employees who engage in the distribution of goods across state lines, or individuals who perform work that facilitates operations of instrumentalities of commerce. That would include maintaining, repairing, or improving those instrumentalities. An individual is also covered if the employee contributes directly to movement of commerce by providing goods or facilities to be used or consumed by the instrumentalities of commerce in the direct furtherance of their activities of transportation, communication, transmission, or other movement in interstate commerce. Some examples would be employees who provide energy or fuel to railroads, energy provided to radio stations or airports. These are all covered because what these individuals do in providing them energy or fuel is so related to the actual movement of commerce that they are deemed to be essential and an indispensable part thereof. So that is what it means to be engaged in commerce. So what does it mean to be engaged in production of goods for commerce? And this is a three-part test which essentially breaks apart that phrasing. Production of goods and for commerce. In terms of production, if the employee is employed in producing, manufacturing, mining, handling, transporting, or in any other manner working on the goods, or in any closely related process directly essential to the production in any state, it's going to be involved in the production. Even if the employee did not work on or come into actual contact with the goods, the employee may still be engaged in, quote, indirect production of goods if the work was closely related and directly essential. So, for example, we have a Supreme Court case of 1942, Kirschbaum v. Walling. There, the employees engaged in the operation and maintenance of a loft building in which goods for interstate commerce were produced. These individuals were covered under the FLSA. So goods and of goods. Goods refers to wares, products, commodities, merchandise, or subjects of commerce of any character or any part or ingredient of those goods. This would include ships or marine equipment. It's not limited to commercial goods, nor is it limited to tangible property. It can be ideas, wishes, orders, and intelligence. Those are language directly from the FLSA. An example of those would be telegraphic messages. Goods can also include written materials. Examples include magazines, brochures, pamphlets, fiscal and other statements and accounts, correspondence, lawyers' briefs, advertising, motion pictures, newspapers, artwork and manuscripts for publication, sample books, letterheads, envelopes, labels, checkbooks, even candy wrappers. You also would be included in goods would be gold, livestock, poultry, eggs, vehicles, garments that are being laundered or rented, ice, containers, electrical energy or power, gas, and byproducts. Goods do not include, the term doesn't include goods after they've been delivered into actual physical possession of the ultimate consumer, other than a producer, manufacturer, or processor. Goods also does not include dams or river improvements, highways and viaducts, or railroad lines. So then we come to the third prong under this portion of the test for whether an individual is covered for being engaged in the production of goods for commerce, and that would be the discussion of the word commerce. Now, we discussed commerce a little bit above, and it means generally the same things. For commerce means that the employer intends or hopes or has reason to believe that the goods or any unsegregated part of them will move into interstate or foreign commerce. It does not matter whether the goods are actually put into interstate or foreign commerce, but only that they are reasonably anticipated to do so at the time where the employees worked on those goods. So, for example, if you develop a whole bunch of goods, if you produce a whole bunch of goods that are meant to be shipped out of state, and then there is a warehouse fire and all of the goods are destroyed, it doesn't matter that those goods actually never entered into interstate commerce, because that was the intention of when they were being produced. So those would qualify as being goods for commerce. Goods are not always for commerce when they're goods used within the same state. So, for example, employees producing ice in a local plant, delivering it to a water cooler in a community railroad station would not be for commerce. But if you're producing ice for refrigeration of goods during transport on those railroad cars, that would be for commerce. Even if the goods are made for use within the same state initially and then sold to someone who moves to another state, may not be for commerce. Again, you look to what was the expectation at the time. All right, so we also have, as subject to the FLSA, public employees. So except for certain high-level officers and advisors, state and local government employees are generally subject to minimum wage and the overtime requirements of the FLSA, to the same extent as private individuals or private employees would be. And that's changed over time. In 1985, the United States Supreme Court, in a case by the name of Garcia v. San Antonio MTA, it actually overruled previous Supreme Court holdings that state and local government employees engaged in traditional government activities were constitutionally exempt from the minimum wage requirements under federal law. And this change and this decision by the Supreme Court was actually codified in the 1989 amendment that we already discussed regarding defining enterprise engaged in commerce or in the production of goods for commerce. So public employers like hospitals, medical, nursing care, that provide medical or nursing care for residents, public and private schools and preschools, and government agencies will all be subject to the FLSA requirements.